Nammo Phat. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our daily practice check-in. Listen, listen, listen. This beautiful sound calls us back to our true home. This is the third mindfulness training. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I vow to cultivate responsibility and learn ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. I'm determined not to engage in sexual relations without love and a long-term commitment. To preserve the happiness of myself and others, I'm determined to respect my commitments and the commitments of others. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. Today's reading from Kamma in the End of Kamma by Ajahn Sucitto is on latent tendencies. Taken as a whole, the practice of parami sets up powerful values that direct personal intent skillfully, and there are benefits, attitudes and energies that go towards deceit, malice, and covetousness get less food, and as our intention gets straightened, this affects how we regard the world, because the intention behind what we look at or touch and why is a major part of what designates experience. As that purifies, we see things in a way that untangles our world. For example, rather than looking at life in terms of what we can get out of it, we look at what we can give. Rather than wondering how long does it take, we incline towards valuing patience and resolution. Then, rather than speculating as to whether we are admired or ignored, we settle in awareness of our integrity. So our naming of the world gets shifted to redesignate it as a vehicle for value and liberation, rather than a me-them, gain-loss ride on a bouncing ball. The more you hold up to the values of a skillful life, the more that purifying process reveals dispositions and tendencies that are latent and unresolved. These latent tendencies, anusaya, include basic inclinations such as sensuality, irritation, opinionatedness, and conceit, which may not be revealed as such in ordinary life because our ways of operating avoid a thorough investigation of our inclinations. This is why we practice resolution. We make commitments to acts of value and integrity, especially when things aren't going in line with our wishes. In this respect, Buddhist practice isn't about peak moments. It's about training. It's about strengthening and broadening commitment to maintaining standards and virtues, even when the peak experiences aren't rolling in and your unacknowledged tendencies are rising up. One frequently used context of training is just that of living with others. In a lot of Buddhist monasteries, as well as in the world in general, there's a good amount of working with and being with other people. We build, we do management, we wash the dishes, as well as converse and meditate, often in a group situation. The mind is thus held in a shared world, something which doesn't follow purely individual dispositions and energies. Through this, we get to see that our naming, our interpretations of what is normal or friendly, our attitudes around leadership and independence, our sensitivity to other people all differ. Seeing and responding to this means that a lot of patience, kindness, and commitment to clearing biases have to get generated. The point isn't even to have a wonderfully harmonious community, but to loosen attachment to one's own naming. It's that loosening which gives the mind the room and the encouragement to move beyond its habitual standpoints. I appreciate this integrated approach especially as I didn't start out from that perspective. In the monastery in Thailand in which I began my training as a Buddhist monk, there was a section set aside for intensive meditation practice. Monks in the monastery would go into this section in order to review and deepen their understanding of Dhamma. They generally spend a couple of weeks in there and then return to what they were part of. I was one of the few Westerners. The 3 or 4 of us there were all new to Thailand, meditation, and monastic life. We had nothing to do, no get-togethers, and nowhere else to go. Conversation wasn't allowed. It was, as you might guess, pretty stressful being in a small hut all day, trying to meditate, and watching the mind jump over the monastery wall for hours at a time. The one thing that we did do together was go out on alms round in silence every morning. It was our only occasion of being together in the entire day. It should have been easy, just walking along receiving offerings. But instead, all kinds of stuff that wasn't on the Enlightenment script, came up. The first person in my life who said he'd like to kill me, with an axe, if possible, was a fellow monk. Well, I did walk on alms round at a pace that he felt was too slow, while he had to walk behind me. As for me, I can't recall having much of a violent impulse until I became a serious meditating monk, but I could feel violent towards the monk behind me in that file. After all, the Buddha said we should walk quietly, making little noise, so that we could be calm and focused in order to get enlightened. But every day that monk behind me kept on clearing his throat as we walked along. That's justification for murder, isn't it? Naturally, we didn't act on these impulses. We let them pass, which was a little bit of awakening. There was enough good Kamma to have an established sense of morality and even mindfulness. But it blew apart the idea that you don't have ill will just because in solitude no one's pushing your buttons. So in the context of training, the violent impulse was useful. I had to let go of my idea of myself as being a reasonable, easy-going kind of guy, and focus on the tendency of ill will. And further, when I acknowledged that solitary practice hadn't made it any easier to share the planet for a couple of hours with another harmless human being who shared my interest in awakening, the paradigm of mind cultivation had to shift. I began to understand that you don't get out of Kamma by avoiding it. One thing led to another, and after 3 years of practicing in solitude, I returned to England for a visit. I stopped off in London, where Ajahn Sumedho was leading a small group of monks. In that community, there was more emphasis on action and interaction, as well as on a training in how to make and look after your own robes, how to attend to a teacher, and many small matters of protocol. It also felt like a more friendly way to live, although people could get stirred up at times. But the general idea was to be mindful of whatever the mind brought up and investigate where the suffering was. This seemed to be a way to broaden and integrate my practice, so I stayed on. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for joining me this morning.